Hi, Jules Wyman here. I will just waffle, drink tea, and listen to the chorus of people singing outside whilst I wait for you to be able to see that this is going live. I know it takes a while for Facebook to reach out and connect with people. So, and in fact, whilst I'm doing that, I am just going to check that it's working, because it's always a bonus to know. It is saying at the moment that the connection is weak, which is a joy. As you can see, I'm in my office and not at home. I know I tend to get home and broadcast from home. Hi Alex, the updates are working better. That's really good to know. And there's somebody else there as well. Do say hi, whoever you are. This is, it's great to have you here. Now I know that it is live. Fab, we're all good. I'll turn myself off though, because otherwise I'll see myself out of my peripheral vision, which will be a bit weird. So it's an interesting topic this evening, how to be around difficult or different people. Hi Ruth, lovely to have you here this evening. Oops, nearly pressed the wrong button. How to be around difficult or different people. What coping mechanisms do you use? What strategies do you have? And whilst I'm kind of doing the intro part, if you have got any specific strategies or coping mechanisms that you use, then please feel free to share them. And equally, whilst you're in the process of doing that, as you've already started doing, remember doing the likes and the hearts and all of that malarkey helps this to reach other people. And the whole purpose of me doing these and showing up for these every week is so that it can reach other people and hopefully give them different perspective, potentially some resources, so that they can make a difference for themselves and for their own lives. So the more that you can do the likes and the hearts and all of that shebang, or anything else, any other emojis, then that's very gratefully received, and that's the purpose of them. Also, to remember that you can share this. There is a way. If you click on the button below, I can't remember, mine shows up differently, but it does tell you how to be able to share this, or you can just tag people in it. Thank you. We've had all the emojis. Thank you very much for that. I love it. Makes me laugh. That's brilliant. But yeah, you can tag people in it. And as I say, the whole point isn't because I'm looking for you to go, oh, Jules, you're amazing. That's not the purpose of it. It is literally so that even if you're watching this on a recording, the more thumbs and hearts and smiley face and angry face or whatever you choose to do, it helps this to reach out to other people and make a difference for them, hopefully, as well. So straight away, Alex has jumped in with saying, you usually pretend to know people's names. I feel everything all the time. Oh, is that all of the emojis? Brilliant. Love it. I love it. Thanks, Alex. I keep nearly pressing the wrong button this evening, though, which means I could end up blocking you, which I don't want to do. Because it's lovely to have you here from... I've got, in fact, at the moment, as far as I'm aware, depends on where Ruth is, but if you are in your home country and Alex is in his home country, we've got all three of us on three different countries, which is lovely. Truly international. So this topic of conversation is one that has come up a few times with people asking me, and it's not just family related and where people are choosing to spend the holidays over the next week or so. It's actually people who have been talking about work parties and all the different functions they've had to go on, and some people are doing that, and that's something they have to do throughout the year to do with their work. It's people, believe it or not, that have got, and I do have to say it's usually teenagers, the kids are off school, so that means that they've got more time and they're having challenges with those. That's why I put difficult and different people, because there's both things going on there. So it's not just the assumption of the whole family coming together for a celebration of whatever it is that you're celebrating at this time of year, whilst that is obviously a main focus. There are so many different angles with this, and that's why I really am using it as a starting topic and would love your input, would love your thoughts, and whether it is by pretending to know other people's names or whether it's something else, a bigger strategy, because that's all I'm going to do is I don't think there's one way of doing things. I'm just going to share with you my thoughts and my insights on this, because there are a number of times over the last few years in particular where I found myself in situations where, for various different reasons, being around people that probably in most circumstances I wouldn't choose to be around. However, the circumstances mean that I'm around them. And I kind of said this on the trailer about choosing. I think we've always got a choice, actually, even when there are the obligations in there. I do think we have a choice, and that might be a choice that we choose to go along with the obligations or the duties as we see them. For example, whether you're going to family or in-laws or friends over the festive period, is that we think, oh, well, you have to do that. Well, actually, no, you don't have to. You do actually have a choice. And I know with the situations that I've found myself in over the past few years, as I say, not just from a celebration perspective at this time of year, but throughout the year, I have found different ways of being around different people and being around people that could be perceived as being difficult people as well. So I'm going to share those with you. I just want to reiterate that these are not be-all and end-all strategies. They are my strategies. They are my ways of using things, and I really genuinely would love your thoughts and your inputs on them. So the first thing that the first place now, I wouldn't say this is something I did straight away, but the first place now that I really start to look at is around my expectations. So what are my expectations of those particular people and myself in that situation and of that situation? Because quite often we create, and sometimes quite often, really unhelpful expectations. So I know for years I had an expectation that I assumed that I would have this Hollywood Christmas, because not necessarily from the luxury side of things, but just that everything would be perfect and all the dinner would be perfect and all the jokes would be perfect. And I was very much somebody who I obsessed with musicals as a child and loved Sound of Music and Mary Poppins. So of course my expectation was that if I was in a family environment, of course everyone would crack out an instrument and we'd all start singing in perfect harmony and know all the words. And I had those kinds of expectations and couldn't work out why I was finding it hard to be in that kind of environment, and also tended to feel let down until I started to question those expectations and take a step back and start to ask myself, get clarity on what those expectations were that I was having, and start to ask myself whether they were realistic. Expecting everyone to crack out an instrument and start singing in playing perfect tunes and singing perfectly. Well, I don't really think there's anybody other than 2 potentially members of my family that can even play an instrument. So that's fairly unfair if I'm carrying that expectation into these family celebrations and expecting them to be part of it. It's not really helpful to them or me, and hence why then I would be experiencing disappointment or frustration or anger or stress or upset, whatever the emotion was I was attaching to it, because I'm the one carrying these expectations. What if those people actually want to sit down and just watch movies or eat or chat or go for a walk, or they've got other expectations? And this is where I think a lot of the conflicts then can start happening, because if I've got expectations and this is how I want things to be and it has to be this way to make it my best period of time, but it's and they've got theirs, and very rarely do we actually sit and talk about them. So how can we even bring them into alignment? But 2, they could be completely opposed, and I'm going to be upsetting them in some senses because I'm not fulfilling their expectations, and vice versa. So therefore there's bound to be conflict created, even if that conflict is only internal as a disappointment, if that makes sense. So Alex has put, in AA, they told me expectations are premeditated resentments. Always enjoying hearing that, LOL. But it was pretty on the point. Yeah, I've never heard that, never been part of that organisation, and I've never heard that phrase, but expectations are premeditated resentments, which is beautiful and actually links onto another thing that I would want to speak about later. But these expectations are... they're expectations that are unfair the majority of the time, and even if those expectations are that we expect a certain person, oh well, they're always going to be like that, they're always like that, they're always going to behave that way, they're always jolly, or they're always moaning, or if that's in conflict with how we are as well, then we're not being fair to that person or group of people in that sense. Excuse me. So my first thing, thank you for all the hearts and the likes and things popping up. So my first thing really is that once I recognised that my disappointment, my frustrations, my stresses, etc., was coming from my expectations, and the fact that, one, I needed to get clarity on what those expectations were. Two, I needed to look at the truth and the realism of those expectations. Three, I needed to check in whether, if I shared those expectations with somebody else, this other person, for example, or group of people, is that actually going to make them happen, or is it going to help? And four, potentially think about what their expectations could be. Now, if I'm not going to ask them or talk to them about their expectations, then that last part is going to be very much based on my assumptions, and is not going to be a truth because it's an assumption. And unless I ask them what they're expecting, then it's kind of never going to be supportive in that way. So that's my first offering, really, is to really think about what your expectations are of those people, of yourself, of the situation, because my assumption based on my own experience is that 9 times out of 10 is those expectations just aren't helpful in any way, shape or form. And then kind of following on from that really is very often, and again this is where a lot of conflicts can start, is regardless of who that person is, be it a work colleague, be it a loved one, be it a family member, who could be a loved one as well, is that there's lots of hearts and things coming in, thank you, is that we quite often create those conflicts. And again, when I talk about conflicts, it may not necessarily be externalized. It may just be kind of like internal discomfort or harumphing or stressing or moaning or victim talk or self-criticism or whatever it may be. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a full-blown argument or strop in some way, shape or form. But quite often these come about because we have our own fixed way of doing things. We have our own fixed assumption of how things are, and we make that belief, that way of doing things, we make that right in our, and again this may only just be in our heads, we make it right, and we don't like to, the brain doesn't like to be wrong, and so therefore it's looking to prove that all the time. Now what can happen with that is that therefore with other people, if somebody else challenges, and this time of year we tend to be in situations for longer than we would do normally. Thanks for all the loves, Alex. We tend to be in situations, and usually more intense situations than we would be normally. So, you know, families are in smaller spaces, or even just collectively they're en masse in one space together, and that's rather than it just being a turn up for a dinner. You know, there's usually they turn up beforehand, and then there's the meal, and then there's some time afterwards. So it's usually a bit more intense, and quite often people are staying over for days on end as well. So when you're in that kind of situation, conversations or seeing people's behaviours, we can get triggered. And quite often that triggering is based around us having the need or the want to be right, or rather not be wrong. And to do that, we then have to make the other person wrong. Now, quite often, again, I just want to reiterate, so often this is going on in our heads. It's not even a conversation that we're having outwardly. Or we may be trying to convince somebody to get on our side, or trying to convince them that our way is the right way, when in actual fact, again, that may not be supportive. Let me know, by the way, if this is making sense, or whether it's or whether you want more clarification, because I'm very aware of the time this evening, and this is such a big topic, and I'm sure that lots of you are listening to this are going to be relating it to either past situations or situations that you've got coming up. So if there's specific questions around this topic, then please do put them there, and I will quite happily then go off top, well, not off topic, but I can then answer your questions rather than just following this flow. Because going back to the need to be right, and this is something that I can relate to very clearly, because it's something that I've had to face and work on for myself for a long period of time, of having this need to be right, having this want to be right. Because if I had this, if I didn't perceive myself as being right, then I had to perceive myself as being wrong, and that was so painful and uncomfortable for me that I would do anything I possibly could, and that might mean removing myself from the situation, getting drunk, whatever it may be, so that I could avoid that situation rather than be with that situation. So having that need to be right, having that desire to be right, can cause all kinds of external and, more specifically, internal conflicts, because we then start to look and vie to getting people on side. So my kind of strategy or way of looking at that is, and interestingly enough, I have a mantra that I use for myself, which is be authentic to self and considerate of others. Be authentic to self and considerate of others. That's my own personal mantra that I use. Now, interestingly enough, I'll come on to that in a moment, Alex. Interestingly enough, I've made my my yogi tea this evening, and on the back of yogi tea, they always have a little saying, and this saying this evening says, and I just picked this tea bag randomly, it says, live with reverence for yourself and others. Live with reverence for yourself and others. And I think that's really interesting, that's popped up this evening, talking about this, because it is about having that reverence, about not and not needing the other person to be right or wrong. And going back to what you said, oh, hi Adrian, lovely to see you here this evening, is that it's not about whether we're right or wrong, it's just that we have an opinion. Because if we want to perceive ourselves as right, then we have to make somebody else wrong. And if we keep buying into that process of, by making myself right, I'm making you wrong, then at some point the brain has to then be making the other person right, and therefore making ourselves wrong, which keeps us caught in that loop. So it's not about being right. We can have our own rightness for ourselves, our own rightness, our own way of being, our own way of perceiving, but it's recognizing that every single person on this planet perceives the world in a different way, and therefore how can one person be right above somebody else? And I know that the conversation about right or wrong goes into morals and etc., so I'm just going to hit pause on that and step away, because that's not what I'm talking about. And I'm going to loop it back to the being authentic to self and considerate of others, or as it says on the tea bag, live with reverence for yourself and others. And that's to me is something that's really shifted things for me, is because I do my best in situations, even when I'm with difficult or different people, even when they have got different opinions, and I am challenged to understand where they're coming from with those opinions. I do my best to be authentic to myself, which means I may or may not agree with them. I may or may not perceive them as having the right way or the right answer, but I'm authentic to myself and to the other person. So my sorry, my phone has just clicked on something. And I had a little flash then of something I wanted to share with you. It'll come back. But it really is about, I know what it was. I think I've mentioned this before. I did a course a few years ago now with a wonderful lady called Alecs, and she had this amazing ability whenever anybody was sharing. We were going through various different processes, and some of them were really quite intense and therefore very emotive for people. And she had this wonderful saying that when people were sharing their experience, and a lot of it involved talking about their past, is that Alecs would always say, if I'd have had your experience, if I'd have been brought up in your environment and heard and seen and lived through what you've lived through, I'd probably feel that too, or I'd be thinking that too, or I'd be perceiving the world in that way too. And that kind of phraseology of recognizing and honoring that we haven't seen the world through somebody else's eyes, so how can we criticize them? And even the worst people in the world, we could say, people who do all kinds of atrocities but believe that they're doing the right thing. How can we honestly say, I believe? How can I honestly say that if I hadn't have had their life experiences and be tapped into the world that they have gone through and their life in their way, how could I say that I wouldn't have those beliefs? And to me, that's the same when you're being in these environments, kind of little pressure cooker environments over the next holiday period that most people are, whether it's work or family, is that when you do come into conversation with somebody that is especially if it's a strong opinion that's different to yours, be authentic to yourself. It's not that you have to change your opinion to agree with them. Be authentic to yourself, but consider it from where they're coming from. Hold them with reverence too, because I'm sure if you'd have had their experiences, their upbringings, their life, all of that kind of side of things, that you potentially could be having the belief that they're sharing with you at that moment in time. And that's where I think, for me personally, it's made being around difficult and different people an easier process for me, because it is recognizing and honoring, and as the tea bag says, holding those people and myself, it's not them or me, it's both, with reverence, that makes a big difference for me. And in that process then, the other things that I would add in as strategies that really help is recognize what you will need in that kind of space. If you're going to be in that intensity for that period of time, what would you need? So say, for example, you and your partner are going to your in-laws, and there's always these different kind of opinions and sibling rivalry or whatever it is that might be kicking off. Just imagine that you and your partner, for example, were able to sit down beforehand and go, okay, so it's an intense time for them, it's an intense time for you. What would both of you need in order to be able to get the very best from that environment? And it might be that you have a code word that enables one to say, I need rescuing, or I'm a bit uncomfortable, or could we go for a walk, or I need some time out, without it being a big thing, so that it's a way that the two of you then could support each other. And it may not be you and a partner, it may be you and another family member or a friend or somebody else that's there of support. It may be that you just need to recognize that for yourself, and that you need to have some space and take some deep breaths, for example. And that may be a key point for you, is to take that space, take those deep breaths, and maybe at times walk away from situations rather than stay embroiled in the conversation, is to take those deep breaths, because within that you can check in a little bit more. It's hitting that pause, and especially if we've been triggered by something, is that it's all too quick that we want to respond. We want to kick back, react rather than respond. Actually, we want to kick back and we want to fight our corner, or we want to defend somebody else, or whatever it may be. And actually, take some space, hit pause and take some space. And even if that means that you need to say, do you know what, I'm just going to step away from this conversation because I'm not going to say something that I want to say. And if that's what you need to do at that moment in time, then that's what's really important for you. And that's being authentic to yourself and considerate to the other person. And it may be that you also need to check in and take care of yourself. It may be that, you know, with as many people do at this time of year, they overindulge in various ways. Now, whether it's eating too much, whether it's loads of sugar, whether it's alcohol, caffeine, other forms of drugs, whatever it may be, is check in with yourself with that. And actually, is that going to be helpful? So it might be a case of, you know, actually I need to drink some more water before I carry on drinking, or maybe I just need to go and just take some time out and just eat some fruit, or just not eat for a while. Maybe I need to get a good meal, whatever it may be. It's taking care of yourself so that you can be authentic in that moment. Otherwise we become reactive. We're on that primal defensive space. Is this all making sense? Level 17, empathy. If I had been man enough to have that conversation 5 years ago, I'd be married already. Oh, that's interesting, Alex. Interesting share. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on what I've said so far? What are your thoughts on being right, or not being worried about not being wrong? About those expectations, about recognizing that if I'd have had your life, if I'd have gone through, where that's concerned, the thing that always reminds me of that is that, you know, so many of us go to this time of year go to be around older relatives quite often. Now, for my parents, my dad's in his 80s, my mum's in her late 70s, and I'm still blessed to have a grandfather still around. And he'll be 99 in a couple of weeks, fully compos mentis, hilarious man that he is. And sometimes with their opinions that they come up, they have a very opposing view to my view of the world. Now, it doesn't make one right or wrong, and I do take a step back and recognise that, you know, the generation that they came through from, you know, my granddad was out and spent 6 years living away during the Second World War and doing whatever he was doing as a soldier at that period of time. My dad grew up in London and was born in London during the Second World War, or prior to the Second World War, and therefore went through all of those experiences. My mum was born during the war and therefore had all of those experiences. So I'm sure that if I'd have been born in that period of time, I'm more likely to have their view of the world now than my view of the world now, if that makes sense. And it's things like that, it's key things like that that I remember to kind of give me that insider step back, rather than look to fight and defend my point of view, to look to make my point of view right. So Alex has put, it's a tough line to preserve relationships and advocate for yourself. I think you've covered a lot of great strategies. Thanks, Alex. It isn't easy because I think part of the challenge is that we do need to, rather than fight for ourselves to put ourselves right, we need to look at that, I think, about taking care of ourselves and our own needs, as well as looking after others. And I do think it needs to come in that order. I don't think it's of value or helpful for it to come the other way around, because if we're always putting other people first, then we're going to be putting their needs, their expectations, if we know what they are, making assumptions about them, and trying to make sure that they're all sorted without any consideration for ourselves. And that's where we can end up feeling depleted, potentially resentful, uncomfortable, etc. for ourselves. So believe it or not, that is 7:30 coming up already in the UK. I'm just scanning. Yeah, there was one other thing that I wanted to share, that I know that I've shared this with clients as a resource, and I just wanted to share it more as a little insight, something to hold on to for yourself, as a potential thing that can help you shift your mindset. So this is especially one usually when we're around authority figures, but more specifically when we tend to be around family. And it's about hitting pause in any moment when you kind of notice, it's especially if you're kind of being reactive. It doesn't mean to say that you're in an argument or anything like that, but it's about if you are being reactive, be really aware of that, and be aware of that, the quickness that you are to respond, whether that's jokes or whether it's banter or whether it's argumentative. It doesn't matter. Notice that and just ask yourself, what age am I being right now? What age is this behaviour coming from? And if you can be aware in that moment, quite often we'll start to realise that, well, I'm certainly not behaving the age that I am at this moment in time. I know, for example, when I realised this myself, I would go to my parents' house and literally go to put the key in the front door. And as I was putting the key in the front door, my shoulders would drop, my head would drop, not because I wasn't looking forward to seeing my parents, but I suddenly became this 14-year-old sneaking home, having been to the pub. And that for some reason kicked in the moment I was putting the key in the door. So therefore it was a step back for me to check in, because if that mindset has come to the fore of me kind of going, I'm 14, then that's going to bring in all kinds of behaviours. And whether I'm greeted with our open arms or frowned faces, it's going to be that 14-year-old that reacts rather than the 40-odd-year-old woman that I am these days. And that's a big difference, and it gives you a different space. And that's, to me, is a strategy that I have found extremely useful as a check-in, not making the age that you turn into right or wrong, but just have the awareness of it. Be very mindful of it for yourself. So, gosh, where does the time go? How does it go this fast? I would love to know, for those of you that are watching, whether you've just joined in for the last few minutes, or whether you've been dipping in and out, or whether you've been on throughout the whole call. What is your one takeaway, and or what are your questions from what I've shared with you this evening of how to be around difficult or different people? What's your one takeaway, or what's your question from the conversation that we've been having this evening? I just give you time, because I know that if I'm trying to type something in myself. Now, actually, whilst you're typing, just to make you aware that if you are not already on my newsletter, then if you go to juleswyman.com, and in fact, I shall put this in here if I can, if you're going to let me. Whoops. I can't even spell my own name. That's a little bit of a worry. No, I don't want an email address, but thank you for that. Okay. So if you go to juleswyman.com, on the right hand side of the website, you'll see there is 7 keys of confidence. And if you haven't grabbed that, you can grab that. And that will put you onto my mailing list. And there are some lovely little treats that I've got lined up, some special offers that start tomorrow, in fact, and run through until the end of January. So make sure you're on there to be able to access those. Ruth, I'm glad that you found it really useful. Hopefully you'll be able to apply that with the various different kind of situations that you have to face with all the different people that you interact with as you move around the globe. Yeah, and if anybody else, being authentic to self, reverence, yeah, love it. Do you know, reverence is a word that I didn't actually understand until a few years ago, and it came into my life, and I thought, it kept being used in a situation. I thought, I need to understand what this is. And my coach said to me, we were talking about the word, and he said, is there anything that you have in your life that you hold with reverence? And it took me a long time to realise that no, there was nothing at that point in my life that I held with reverence. And it really made a big shift for me. So holding yourself with reverence and other people, yeah, it's not something that happens overnight, but it is possible to at least start And interestingly enough, it seems to be the hardest one is to start with yourself. So that personally is where I would say to head for. So I'm just going to give it another couple of minutes in case there is anybody else. It is at this point as well that would be really useful for if it has made sense. In fact, if you're still on here, or even if you're watching the recording, if you if this has made sense or it has resonated with you, then give me some thumbs or some hearts, or if you want to do the whole emojis, then go for it. As I say, I said at the beginning, that makes it easier to reach other people. I think I've possibly waffled enough to give anybody time to type. If you're still typing and you're kind of shouting at the screen going, no, I'm still going, then don't worry, because even if I hit finish, your question will still pop up, and I will come back to it. Even though it won't be a live video, I will come back and answer it. So thank you so much. You just need time to unpack everything. Yeah, I'm sure. Thanks, Alex. However you choose to spend the time over the next few weeks, do have some time to think about your needs, your expectations, and taking care of yourself, and whether you do choose to hold yourself, or at least hold yourself in reverence in order to hold other people in reverence. I'd love to know how that goes. There isn't a confidence question time next week, as it is a bank holiday in the UK, and I will be relaxing, enjoying the bank holiday. However, we will be starting afresh on January the 2nd, even though that is a bank holiday, but there's a special reason why I'm doing that particular one. So make sure you tune in even on January the 2nd. And in the meantime, however you choose to spend this time, have a wonderful, wonderful time. And thank you for tuning in this evening. I'll speak to you again soon. Take care. Bye.